What if I told you that most of the work you're doing in your garden right now is work you created for yourself? And I don't mean that to be harsh. I mean it because I've been doing this for a long time and I still catch myself making some of these mistakes. Today we're going to walk through the landscaping mistakes that quietly turn a manageable yard into a part-time job. And the best part? Every single one of them is fixable. Some of them you can fix this weekend. I've been in landscaping and gardening for a long time now. And one of the things you notice after enough years is that the homeowners with the most beautiful, healthy gardens are almost never the ones working the hardest. That used to confuse me when I was younger. You'd expect the best-looking garden to belong to the person out there every single weekend, sweating through their shirt, pulling weeds, pruning, watering, fighting the whole thing. But it's often the opposite. The gardens that look the best, the ones that seem almost effortless, belong to the people who made better decisions at the beginning, or who figured out, usually the hard way, what not to do. That's really what this video is about. Not just a list of mistakes, but the philosophy underneath them. Because almost every mistake we're going to talk about today has the same root cause. People are working against their garden instead of with it. And once you understand that, everything changes. Your Saturday mornings start looking a lot more relaxed. So let's get into it. And I promise, by the end of this, you're going to look at your yard a little differently. Planting the wrong plant in the wrong spot. This is the big one. If I had to pick a single mistake that creates more ongoing work than any other, it's this one. And it's so common because it doesn't feel like a mistake at the time. You go to the nursery, you see something beautiful, it's got a great little tag on it. Maybe it's on sale, and you bring it home and you stick it in the ground somewhere it looks nice, and that's the end of the thought process. 2 years later, you're out there every other week pruning it back because it's swallowing your walkway. Or it's dying because it's sitting in full sun and it wants shade. Or it wants well-draining soil and you've got heavy clay. And now you're fighting that plant constantly, which is exhausting, and the plant isn't even happy about it either. It's a bad situation for everybody involved. Here's what I want you to understand about plants. A plant that is growing in the right conditions, the right sun exposure, the right soil type, the right amount of space, is a plant that essentially takes care of itself. That's not an exaggeration. I've seen it over and over. The right plant in the right spot will thrive with very little intervention. The wrong plant in the wrong spot will demand your attention forever, and it'll still look mediocre. So before you ever buy a plant, before you even walk into a nursery, do a little homework on the spot you're trying to fill. How much sun does it get? What's the soil like? How much space do you actually have when that plant reaches its mature size? Not the size it is in the 4-inch pot, but the size it's going to be in 10 years. That mature size is what matters. And here's something I want to say specifically about trees because I see this mistake constantly. Almost every normal-sized tree, meaning something that's going to reach 25 feet tall and wide or bigger, is too large for a typical residential garden. People plant a tree that looks adorable as a young sapling and then wonder why, 15 years later, it's lifting their driveway and blocking their neighbor's light. Research the mature size before you plant. Always. The right plant in the right spot means less watering, less pruning, less fertilizing, less everything. It's the single most powerful low-maintenance decision you can make, overwatering, and why it creates more work. I want you to think about overwatering differently than you probably do right now. Most people think of it as a plant health issue. Too much water drowns the roots, the plant suffers. Okay, understood. But the bigger problem with overwatering, the one that creates enormous amounts of extra work, is what it does to the rest of your garden. First, weeds. Weeds love water. When you're overwatering your lawn or your beds, you are essentially farming weeds. You are creating ideal conditions for every weed seed that's sitting dormant in your soil to wake up and get going. I've seen yards that were genuinely buried in weeds, And when we cut back the watering to appropriate levels, the weed pressure dropped dramatically within a season. Not because the weeds disappeared, but because we stopped inviting them. Second, fungal disease. If you're watering late in the evening, which a lot of people do out of convenience, that water sits on your lawn and in your soil all night long with no sun to dry it out. That is a perfect environment for fungal problems to develop. And once you've got fungal disease in a lawn, you've got a whole new problem to manage. So we always want to water in the morning, ideally right before or just as the sun is coming up. The water soaks in, the sun comes up, everything dries out appropriately. That simple timing change prevents an enormous amount of future work. Third, and this one surprises people, overwatering actually weakens your plants over time. When you water deeply and infrequently, you encourage roots to grow down deep into the soil, searching for moisture. That produces a strong, drought-tolerant plant. When you water lightly and constantly, roots stay shallow. They have no reason to go deep. And then when you have a hot spell or you miss a day of watering, the plant panics because it never developed that deep root system. The goal, and I've been saying this for years, is to water as little as possible while having everything look like it doesn't need watering. I know that sounds almost like a riddle. But what it means in practice is water deeply, water infrequently, water in the morning. Get a soil penetrant if you got heavy compacted clay soil because that'll help the water actually get down into the profile instead of just running off. And then, step back. Your garden will thank you, your water bill will thank you, and your weekends will have a lot fewer weed pulling sessions in them. Using the wrong mulch, or no mulch at all. Let me tell you something about mulch that I genuinely wish more people understood, because it might be the single most underused tool in residential landscaping. Top-dressing mulch is, and I don't use this word lightly, a mini miracle. And most homeowners either skip it entirely or they're doing it wrong. Here's what a good layer of top-dressing mulch does. It protects your soil from the sun, which means it conserves moisture and you need to water less. It breaks down over time and enriches the soil, feeding everything growing in it. It suppresses weeds incredibly effectively by blocking the light that weed seeds need to germinate. And it creates ideal conditions for the beneficial life in your soil to thrive. All of that from just putting a layer of material on the ground. I mean, come on. Now here's where people go wrong. Some people use the wrong material and create what I call the bathtub effect, where you essentially create a barrier that traps water and prevents proper drainage. You do not want to pile up thick layers of wood chips directly against plant stems or tree trunks because that causes rot and invites pests. And you need to renew your mulch every few years because it does break down, which is actually a good thing, but it means you need to top it up. The other mistake is going too thin. A skimpy layer of mulch does almost nothing for weed suppression. You want somewhere around 2 to 3 inches, consistently applied. When I see a bed with a thin, patchy layer of mulch that you can barely see, I already know that gardener is out there pulling weeds every couple of weeks. The mulch isn't doing its job because there isn't enough of it. Do this one thing correctly, apply a good consistent layer of the right mulch to all your planting beds, and you will noticeably reduce your maintenance hours. It really is that simple. And for the people in the back who are still hand weeding without mulch every summer, I say this with love. Please, just mulch. Ignoring soil health. Okay, this is the one that I feel most strongly about. If you've watched our other videos, you've heard us talk about this. But I want to explain it specifically in the context of extra work, because the connection is direct, and most people never make it. When your soil is unhealthy, when it lacks the beneficial bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes that make up a living soil ecosystem, a whole cascade of problems follows. Your plants are weaker and more vulnerable to pests and disease. Your lawn develops thatch buildup that requires dethatching. You get compaction that requires aeration. You get fungal problems. You get grub infestations. And what do most people do when all of those problems show up? They reach for chemical solutions. Pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, fungicides. And those products, particularly the synthetic ones, often further damage the life in the soil, so you need more of them next season. And the season after that. It becomes a cycle that you can never quite escape, and every year you're out there doing more work and spending more money just to stay in the same place. The way out of that cycle is to focus on feeding your soil rather than just feeding your plants. Compost, earthworm castings, products specifically formulated to build beneficial life in the soil. When you build a truly healthy soil, that soil aerates itself because the life in it is doing the mechanical work for you. It breaks down thatch naturally. It fights off fungal disease by outcompeting the bad fungi with stronger beneficial fungi. It produces nematodes that eat grubs before they become a problem. I'm not going to pretend this happens overnight. Building genuinely healthy soil takes time. But once you get there, and I've seen this on properties we've managed for years, the maintenance load drops substantially. The garden becomes self-regulating in a way that is genuinely remarkable to watch. Start with your soil. Everything else follows from that. Planting too close together. Here is a mistake that I understand completely, because it comes from a good place. You plant a new bed, and it looks a little sparse. The plants are small, there's a lot of bare soil showing, and your instinct is to fill it in. So you plant more. And it looks great. It looks lush and full, and you feel good about it. Year 3, you have a jungle. Everything is crowding everything else. Plants that were supposed to have 2 feet of space are fighting for 6 inches. Shrubs are growing into each other and into your walkway. You're out there constantly trying to manage a situation that was set up to be unmanageable from the beginning. What you should do instead, and this takes some discipline, is plant at the correct spacing for the mature size of each plant, and then use mulch to cover the bare soil in the interim. It looks a little sparse at first, and that's okay. Within 2 to 3 years, those plants are going to fill in properly, they're going to have the airflow they need to stay healthy, and you're not going to be out there every month trying to wrestle them back into their allotted space. There's also a disease component here that people don't think about. Plants that are overcrowded don't get adequate airflow. Poor airflow creates humid microclimates right at the plant level, which is ideal for fungal problems. So, overcrowding doesn't just create pruning work, it creates pest and disease work too, which then creates chemical work. You see how one mistake multiplies. We like to say in design, think about what this bed looks like in 5 years, not what it looks like today. Plan for the future version of the garden. Your future self will be very grateful. Pruning at the wrong time and the wrong way. Pruning is one of those things that feels very productive. You're out there with your loppers, you're cutting things back, you feel like you're accomplishing something. And sometimes you are. But done wrong, pruning doesn't just fail to help. It actually creates significantly more work down the road. Let's start with the wrong way because this is the one I see most often. People do what's called a heading cut. They cut a branch in half. Maybe a shrub is getting a bit large, so they shear the whole thing back. What happens next is the plant responds to that cut by sending out multiple new shoots just below the cut. Instead of 1 branch, now you've got 4 or 5. The plant gets bushier and more chaotic. It regrows faster than before, and you're out there doing the same pruning job again in a few months. And again, and again. The correct technique is a thinning cut, where you remove the branch entirely, going all the way back to where it originates from the main trunk or stem. A thinning cut removes mass from the plant without triggering that aggressive rebound growth. It keeps the plant looking natural, it maintains the plant's structure, and it means you're pruning less frequently because you haven't set off that cycle of aggressive regrowth. Now let's talk timing, because this is equally important. Trees and shrubs put on new growth for a reason. That new growth is how the plant feeds itself through photosynthesis. If you come in right after a plant has put on all its new spring growth, and you prune heavily, you take away the plant's capacity to photosynthesize and grow further. And what does the plant do? It pushes more new growth to compensate. You've just created a cycle where the plant is constantly trying to recover and you're constantly trying to manage it. If you want to reduce the long-term size of a tree or a shrub without creating that exhausting back and forth prune just after the plant has put on most of its new growth for the season, you trick the tree, in the best possible way, into not having the energy reserves to immediately push back. That's how you actually get ahead of it. One more thing on pruning, and I cannot stress this enough. Do not put those black pruning compounds on your cuts. I know they're sold everywhere and they look official and purposeful, but they crack over time, they trap moisture, and they actually prevent the natural healing process that a clean, open cut would allow. A proper thinning cut, made cleanly, heals beautifully on its own. Leave it alone. Nature knows what it's doing. Bad drainage planning. This is the mistake you don't discover until it rains. And by the time you discover it, fixing it properly is expensive and disruptive. I learned this lesson early in my career, on one of our very first jobs, where we completed a beautiful landscape installation. And then, that winter it rained heavily and water started getting into the client's house. That was a serious situation, and it taught me to never overlook drainage. Never. Most people, when they're planning a garden or a landscape, are thinking about what it looks like, which is understandable. But drainage is infrastructure. It's not exciting. You can't Instagram your French drain, but get it wrong, and you will be managing the consequences of that mistake for as long as you own your home. Here's what poor drainage does from a maintenance perspective. Standing water is a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Constantly wet soil creates the perfect conditions for root rot and fungal disease. Water that pools near your foundation can cause serious structural damage. Areas that stay wet become compacted and anaerobic, meaning the soil loses all its beneficial life because there's no oxygen. And those areas struggle to grow anything successfully. The most basic drainage strategy is grade. Your soil should slope away from your house and any structures, so water naturally flows away. That costs very little to address when you're in the planning stage. After the fact, it requires digging things up, and nobody wants that. If grading alone isn't enough, then French drains, dry wells, and inlet drains are your next options. But again, these are significantly easier and less expensive to install before your landscape goes in, rather than after. So if you're in the planning stage right now, even if drainage feels like a boring thing to think about, put it near the top of your list. Your future self will not be pulling up pavers and replanting beds to run drainage pipe. That is a version of your future self that you want to avoid. Relying on chemicals instead of building soil. I touched on this in the soil health section, but I want to address it directly as its own mistake because it's so pervasive and because the maintenance implications are so significant. A lot of homeowners manage their gardens almost entirely with synthetic products. Synthetic fertilizer in the spring, herbicide for weeds, pesticide when something's eating their plants, fungicide when they see brown spots. And here's the thing, those products often work in the short term. The lawn greens up, the weeds die, the pests are knocked back. So it seems like the right approach, until you zoom out. Synthetic fertilizers, particularly when used heavily and without attention to timing, can cause burning. They're volatile in summer heat, and they do very little to improve the long-term health of the soil. In fact, heavy synthetic fertilizer use tends to reduce the biological activity in your soil over time, which means your soil becomes less and less capable of doing its own job. Which means you need more synthetic input to get the same result. It's a treadmill. The alternative, building biological life in your soil through compost, organic products, and beneficial amendments, takes a little longer to show results. But the results compound over time rather than declining. and organically managed soil gets better every year. It requires less and less intervention because the system is increasingly capable of managing itself. Pest pressure goes down. Disease pressure goes down. Weed pressure goes down. You're doing less, and the garden looks better. We're not saying never use any synthetic product under any circumstances. That's not realistic for everyone. But we are saying that if your entire garden management strategy depends on synthetic chemical inputs, you have built yourself a maintenance obligation that will never get smaller. Shift the foundation toward soil biology, and you shift toward a garden that is progressively easier to manage every single year. Mistake 9. No design plan, just impulse buying at the nursery. All right, I have to be honest here. I am not entirely innocent of this one. I've walked into a nursery knowing exactly what I went in for and walked out with 3 things I had no plan for because they were beautiful and they were right there, and the brain just does what it does. So I understand this mistake on a personal level. But here's what impulse buying at the nursery actually costs you. Not just financially, but in ongoing maintenance time. When you pick plants based on how they look in the moment rather than on whether they fit your specific site conditions, your maintenance goals, and your overall design, you end up with a garden that has no coherence. One plant here that needs full sun, planted next to something that wants shade. A shrub that's going to get 8 feet wide, planted 3 feet from your front door because it looked great in a 1-gallon pot. Colors and textures that fight each other rather than complementing each other. And then you spend years managing the consequences of those decisions. Pruning things that are in the wrong spot. Babying plants that are in the wrong conditions. Replacing things that didn't survive because they never really had a chance. The proper sequence. And I know this isn't as immediately satisfying as walking into a nursery and picking whatever catches your eye, is to analyze your site first. Sun exposure, soil type, drainage, existing structures, how you actually use the space. Then define your goals. Do you want low water use? Do you want to grow food? Do you want a space you can sit in? Do you want to minimize pruning? Each of those goals leads you toward very specific plant choices. And finally, develop a plant palette, a relatively small, curated list of plants. And then use those plants generously and repeatedly throughout the garden. That approach, designing first and planting in response to the design, is what separates gardens that maintain themselves from gardens that maintain you. And there's a meaningful difference between those two things. We don't want a garden that requires a new decision every weekend. We want a garden that has been set up so intelligently that the right outcomes happen almost by default. That's achievable. But it starts with a plan. The big idea, wrap up. So here's what all of these mistakes have in common. Every single one of them involves fighting your garden rather than setting it up to work with you. Wrong plant in the wrong spot means you're fighting the plant's natural tendencies forever. Overwatering means you're fighting the weeds and diseases that excess water creates. Bad pruning means you're fighting the plant's response to poor cuts. No soil health means you're fighting pest and disease problems that healthy soil would have prevented. The philosophy underneath all of this, and it's something I've come to believe more strongly the longer I've done this work, is that a truly low-maintenance garden is not a garden that requires no thought. It's a garden that had a lot of thought put into it at the beginning. The investment is front-loaded. You make better decisions early on. You build the soil properly. You put the right plant in the right spot. You lay the mulch. You address the drainage. You develop a real plan. And in return, the garden stops being a burden and starts being something you actually enjoy. That's the goal. Not perfection, not a magazine cover. A garden that makes you happy and that you can maintain without it taking over your life. Now, if you've been watching this and quietly realizing that you've made a few of these mistakes, welcome to the club. Truly. Every person who gardens long enough makes most of them. The good news is that almost every one of them is correctable. And the sooner you start making the adjustments, the sooner your garden starts working in your favor instead of against you. If you want to go deeper on any of these topics, we have videos on soil health, on proper pruning technique, on overseeding your lawn, on drainage, on all of it. And if you subscribe, you get all of that without having to go looking for it. It shows up for you. Which, given that this entire video has been about reducing unnecessary work, feels like the right way to go. We put these videos out every week and they're free. All of it, free. So hit subscribe, and Chip and I will see you in the next one.